Howdy folks, my name is Sean and welcome back to Delver, and today we're doing something a little bit different. I have a very special guest with us today, and we're just going to spend the next little bit talking about worlds and how to build them. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Daði. I, along with my girlfriend, run the YouTube channel MysticArts, where we talk about how to be a dungeon master and do dungeon mastery things. And occasionally we conceal life advice as 3 DM advices in a trench coat. That's the new thing we're trying.
And I think it was like how you and I initially made contact with each other. I think was through Gobi, right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because I was invited to your project that I don't know if that's announced already.
We can talk about that. That's no sweat.
So we were doing the 5-room dungeon jam, and that's where I initially got into contact, and then from there we started a chat with Gobi and all that, and then you made a video about maps, and I messaged you because I was like, I love maps. And then we started to realize that not only do we have a lot of the same philosophy in world building, we directly stole the same stuff from other people for our world. And I think that was the moment I was like, okay, we need to get in a video and talk about this.
Yeah. No, Gobi has a tendency to just sort of connect random people to random people. And she's not only will she walk up to a person and go, hey, by the way, you're my friend now. She'll also walk up to 2 people and go, you 2 are now also friends. And that's just apparently... That's apparently what she does.
She's really good at it. She just kind of blew up in the scene suddenly, and she's been a really awesome friend. It's been really cool.
She's fantastic. Yeah.
I guess I don't know where to start with this, but I guess a brief introduction to the world that you want to talk about today, or just one of the worlds that you find interesting that you've worked on.
So all of my world building has been the same campaign setting. I started playing almost 10 years ago, and I can't see it, but it's the map behind me, right? And it's huge. I think it's 2.5 meters by 3 or something like. It's gargantuan. You can see if I reach out, this is the size of my hand on the map, and it goes a while off that way. And I started with a section of the map over there, and I started drawing it in, and then I ran a campaign there, and I always implied there was more to the world than the map they had available to them. And since then, I've sort of continually expanded it. So I'm somebody who's just been running the same world, and to me, I sort of put loads of different campaign settings into the same world. And that way, depending on what I want to run, I can always find the spot for it somewhere on my setting.
I love stuff like that. It is a type of world building that I am jealous of, because I've tried to do that as well, and I always bake in these new areas to my world, and then I pause and I watch Lord of the Rings, and I'm like, I got to tear it all down. I got to start over.
Right.
But I am a huge fan, especially of Warhammer Fantasy, and how they incorporate the Skaven and the dwarves, and then over here you also have the mummy lords. I'm just it's so cool, and I love that type of world building. It's just something I am super jealous of when people can pull it off, because I have aspects of it in my world, but it's never been fully developed as it could be.
I love that stuff. I think I started into Warhammer. It must have been Magnus, my friend Magnus, is a longtime co-collaborator of mine. He works with me on all the stuff we do on the Patreon. He's also working with me professionally in the day job. And what's kind of spectacular about he introduced me to Total War Warhammer, which is kind of how I got hooked into that. Before I knew the minis existed, but I never knew really anything about it. And I remember just being so giddy, because they're they don't give a shit. You know what I mean? They're okay, let's just what's in this mountain? Big skull. Okay, cool. And who's this guy? His name is von Karstein. He's basically Dracula.
Literally
awesome.
Dracula.
Literally just Dracula. And then you're okay, who's this next door? It's the king of the dwarves. He's got guns and helicopters. Okay, sweet. Turns out you can do that, and you can just have a lot of fun by mixing that kind of stuff together and really bashing all your toys together and having a bunch of fun.
It makes for such an interesting world. I had the similar experience where I had a friend who bought me on sale Warhammer and Warhammer 2. And then we started
Yeah.
playing, and they were always von Karstein. I went the dwarf route, and I just like I fell in love with that setting. And then actually a few years later, she was super knowledgeable about it. She writes all the scripts for Wizards and I forget what it's called. There's a lore channel on YouTube that covers like the lore of the Warhammer fantasy series.
Right.
And it's like Wizards and something. And she writes the scripts for that. And so she was super knowledgeable about it. And she was like, how about I run a D&D adventure in Warhammer Fantasy, and we'll just kind of like piecemeal stuff. And I made my favorite character. His name was 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐸, and he was a Skaven artificer. And I literally described him as like looking like a one-man band, where he had like a giant pack full of all of his spells and like the blade, I forget what it's called, blade circle. It was literally just like he would duck down and blades would shoot out and like spin around and take out enemies around him. And he had like this gun that was like attached to it and he could shoot warp fire. It's so cool to play in a setting like that. And it's endless possibilities. You can do whatever you want. And I love it so much.
And it's also, I think a lot of people forget that this is kind of baked into the bones of the hobby, because like even if you go back to Expedition to Barrier Peaks or whatever, they've got that spaceship that crashed. And they just put that in there. That's just how it works. Have you? Oh no! Is it the Goodman Games one?
It is. Yeah, we
fantastic.
A few actually just last year, we went out to a cabin for a week, and this was something I'd always wanted to do. And I ran Expedition to the Barrier Peaks for 3 days with 2 4-hour sessions each. And so we did an insane amount of running this.
Yeah.
Just because it's a tournament style module. And so I was just like, and the best part, I didn't tell them it was going to be a spaceship. So they made characters for the Greyhawk setting, and then I dropped them in front of the ship, and then they slowly discovered really what it was as we went along. And it was so much fun. It's one of my favorite trips that we've done. We're planning to do it again probably later this year. And for that, I'm thinking about running DCC and some of the crazy, like I think they call it gonzo adventures.
Yeah, those are great. That's amazing. We do a similar thing with cowboys. We go to a cabin and we all bring cowboy hats and we put on mustaches, and we have 6-shooter props, and we all talk in an Icelander's best version of a southern American accent. And I think I run 2 4-hour sessions a day, or something like that. We have waffles for breakfast, and then we play for a bit, and then we have grill food, and then we play some more, and we drink whiskey all day. So we have an amazing time. And on the journey home, we try and remember what the hell happened, because no way we actually remember. We're all whiskey drunk or whatever.
That is, oh God. It's such a, I don't think a lot of people do it nowadays, but like the reason I kind of got into that is there were like some old hats in the community that would talk about, oh, my camera keeps freezing up. The old hats in the community that would talk about, they would just play D&D for like a weekend. And they like not even like 8-hour sessions, like the full weekend. And I just had this idea of like, I think I could do that over the course of like a few days. And so we did it, and same as your group, like it's a blast just being alone with nothing but that.
It's so much fun. Especially, I think I haven't tried bringing a module to it. We sort of, with the cowboy thing, we kind of just improv a lot of it. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to give it a go with a module. I bought the 5e conversion of that thing. I don't have the Goodman Games one, but the what's it, Infinite Staircase. Yeah. I've been wanting to give that a go, but the thing is, I've already run Expedition, my own version of it. I read the original module ages ago, and then sort of I remade it by memory, and I created my own version of the ship. And I didn't have the Froghemus. I had a Neothalid. Hang on. What?
Oh.
If we're showing stuff we have behind us, I had this monstrosity show up.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
This ate, I think, 3 of the player characters. I bought this in secret, and they didn't know. They knew the boss monster had something up their sleeve. So I bought this in secret, and then in the middle of the session, I just go clunk and put that on the table.
We had a campaign years ago now where for months the players were basically building up to fight an ancient red dragon. His name was Vermilion, and I we get to this final session. I'm like getting them ready, and
we're just showing stuff off. I love it.
I just dropped this on the table, and I was like, and blop right here. Go ahead.
Oh, hang on. We
got dragons. We sharing dragons now. Let's see. Station them like this.
So what did you say his name was? Vermilion?
Vermilion the Red Dread.
Is he a multiplanar?
Wait a minute. Hold on a second.
He's over here too.
Yeah, that is the biggest mini I have ever bought. And then pretty much right after that, we primarily went online. And so I have all these miniatures that I have no reason to use them. But the good news is Caitlin's about to start a campaign, so she can use a red dragon. So she can throw that at us.
Oh boy!
Unless I hide it.
Maybe that might be worth it. I mean, this is why the kitchen sink appeals to me is also because I like buying random minis and looking at stupid adventures like Expedition to Barrier Peaks, which is a classic, but it's also sort of inherently goofy. And then you can just chuck that in because they even did this in the Frost Maiden, the Rime of the Frost Maiden, the Icewind Dale adventure. There's spoilers. There's a Neothelid that crashes in that, and it's one of the sort of dungeons you can go to. So I think it's so inherently baked into the hobby in a lot of ways, and I spent years as a DM and as a world builder trying to fight it, trying to make sure that no, you can't do this or that. You can't be a Skaven artificer with that would be out of genre. Mm-hmm. And eventually, I just went, listen, if I can control that situation a little, and I tell my players in this adventure, you maybe shouldn't be the Skaven artificer. But I'm going to run an adventure set in another part of my world, and then you're allowed to play the Skaven Artificer, or you're allowed to play your whatever. And now we can open up the Gonzo door, and we could say, listen, this is all on the table now. And all I really have to do is sort of set myself these small limitations, and then I manage to create these little cubicles that these little differences can sort of come to the forefront.
Like an instanced, like an instanced area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just put Waterdeep into my world because I steal so much. I figure I bought Waterdeep. I'm allowed to do with it what I want. So I put it into my world and I run adventures in there. And Waterdeep is sort of inherently high fantasy. Like dragons can't enter it because of a dome around it. And there's like statues that animate, and they have their own air force with the Griffin riders, and I'm like, okay, that's just what Waterdeep is like. Like if you go outside of Waterdeep, and this is true in Forgotten Realms too. If you go to Neverwinter, they don't have Griffin air cavalry. They don't have animated statues. So yeah, I'm a big believer in that stuff, especially because it lets me play all these things in a connected world and have that sort of Marvel Cinematic Universe experience of, Nick Fury showing up in multiple adventures, or
kind of like
in my
a
case,
crossover.
Yeah, exactly. In my case, it's not Nick Fury. It's a halfling rogue that everybody dislikes, but same difference.
I feel like a lot of my early world building was similar to that. I find myself pushing back on my inherent desire to fill a world like that, because just a few weeks ago we started running a brief 3-shot of Planescape, and
cool.
I had never run it before, and I had this idea in my head like, oh, Planescape is like D&D Star Wars. And so I show up, I start to kind of run it like that, and I loved it. I loved just like everything that could exist in D&D 5e is now in this game. It's in this world somewhere. And it's such a freeing experience to do that. But in the inverse of it, I have a tendency to make my worlds too, I call it globalist. There's too much crossover. And I inherently dislike that. And I know that's not the opinion that a lot of people hold when it comes to world building. But I really like, as you said, like instanced areas where you can have certain types of adventures that are run in the world. And I really enjoy that kind of like, if you go to this part, you're going to run in this kind of game. If you go to this part, you're going to run in this kind of game.
Right.
But a little bit to that as well, I feel like sometimes my worlds don't have an identity because there's so much in it. And that's one of my next projects that I'm working on. I'm trying to make a world where I feel that the world itself is a character in the campaign. And that's going to be that's
about something
for me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I remember I ran Strixhaven. I got the 5th edition book of that, and I really not a good adventure. I would say I don't think it's the kind that makes you fall in love with Strixhaven. But it did make me go look up Strixhaven and read about it online, because there's a whole Magic the Gathering setting, and there's a whole bunch of creative people that clearly worked on that thing. And Strixhaven has a point, which is kind of fascinating. It's not just a magic school. It is a post-war society. So I don't remember what, I think it's like a few hundred years ago, this school started existing. And as a result, everybody in the world went to the school and got to know each other. Got to like introduce each other to each other's cultures, and now they live in a post-conflict society. And they've taken all of the history that existed before the school came along, all of the various sort of complicated, what we could imagine to be our world's history, and they've truncated it, and they said, this is the I think they call it the blood period, or the age of war, or so. They have some word that they say, this is that time where everyone was fighting. Doesn't matter why, we are now enlightened. You know what I mean? And there's a point to it. Now they're all this sort of, enlightened intelligentsia. They're all learning this stuff, and then what happens when something threatens that? And now you have by having a built-in point, a built-in theme, there is also a built-in threat. We could always return to the Blood Age. We could always end up back there.
Like you have that, like that a central conflict is what comes to mind, but that's not necessarily it. It's a central event. It's a central, theme is the best word I can come up with. Where like
a central threat. It's like every story is about, will this bring back the Blood Age? Will this end the Strixhaven era of peace?
Yeah. And I kind of have that right with the campaign I'm running right now. It's taking place basically in the old world, the last campaign about 200 years before the current. There was this large parasitic forest in a corner of the world, and this meteorite basically slammed into it and eviscerated most of the parasitic forest. And the heroes defeated the thing that came out of the comet. And since then, that area has regrown naturally without the presence of the parasite. And so it's this new frontier. So I call it the frontier land. And this whole like conflict for the new campaign is, here's one city that has been established, and it has multiple different factions that are claiming ownership of this area. And it's really interesting just like from an initial standpoint, because the first thing my players said is, we want to become one of the factions. And I went, okay, you can do that. I think that's awesome. And I've just let them drive the story from there. But like having, as you said, like an instanced area, there's things that exist way outside of it. But I kind of like having like this general theme, this central threat of, is it going to become free? Is it going to fall under the purview of these other nations? Or is it going to implode because too many cooks in the kitchen? And I love just like worlds that have that central theme. One of my friends has a world called Deadlands, no affiliation, that is literally just a fantasy setting in a world where death stopped. And there's reasons for that, but we don't know them. And so like people age continuously until the point where they just become these husks, and those are the undead. And it's less about like, oh, zombie virus is spreading. It's just the crawl of time eventually leads to these creatures that have lost their minds. And it's just such a cool idea. And I love a setting like that. And it's just like a central theme. It's just it's awesome. That's what I definitely want to do in the future.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've had a little bit of luck in that sort of area where I try and just take those ideas when I can. And I think there's value to doing them as the settings on their own. But I've had a little bit of luck in sort of deciding, okay, so there's a city in my world called Redyard, which has a similar sort of connection to death. It's got a connection to Orcus. and there was an event in the past where the whole city was taken over by undead. Like thousands died, and there was an army of undead there. And now there is this kind of aftermath of it. And there are these skulls in the catacombs underneath the city, and they all have the mark of Orcus on them. And nobody knows why, and nobody knows why it's just there. Like, is it related to this event? Presumably, but why did that event just happen there? Why didn't it happen everywhere? And there is this mystery to it. But now, if I wanted to play with themes like those, I could do it in that city. So I try and think a lot about these kind of areas, and that way, for me, the world feels kind of richer in that these instances, if we call them that, they kind of hone in on what the adventure is about. But I'm still allowed that crossover if I want it. So, you were talking about the frontier. The main adventure I'm running right now is a hex crawl in a frontier. And then I could get a lot of weight out of having a character representing a faction show up. And they know that faction. They know what's important about it because they featured heavily in another campaign. But they're not going to feature in this campaign except through this one character or the characters that the faction is seen through that NPC. That made me think of we were talking about the frontier, and I was thinking about Pirates of the Caribbean, where you've got these different pirate factions, and they're all like individualized, and then you've got Port Royal, and there is a governor there, and there are some guards there, and that's all sort of connected to that setting. But then you have this outside thing, which is the British Empire or the East India Trading Company. And the king doesn't feature, unless you count the fourth movie, and let's not. But what's his face? Beckett, Cutler Beckett is the main bad guy, and he represents that faction encroaching on the pirates' space. And therefore the faction itself becomes this sort of untouchable entity. There is no version of Pirates of the Caribbean where they go kill the king. But there is a version of Pirates of the Caribbean where they go kill Cutler Beckett.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the one we saw where it blows up.
It's kind of like it's like early Star Wars. The Darth Vader and the Death Star are the representations of the Empire, but until we get to the third movie, there's really no Emperor that we can like visibly interact with. There is like a hologram of him, but we don't necessarily know. It's too lofty of a goal to surmount.
Right, and even I think the Empire is a good example, because even by the time you get to it in Return of the Jedi, it's a little bit of a letdown that the Emperor is just a dude who is on the Death Star that we now have to blow up again. Like, you know what I mean? He's not on. Obviously, they don't know about Coruscant back in the 80s, but he's not on Coruscant, and it's not this other galactic, untouchable presence. But it probably would have been better storytelling. Sorry for anybody who's a big fan of the Return of the Jedi, but it probably would have been better storytelling if we'd focused the rebels' efforts on the encroaching Empire, and then there's another effort, Andor style, with Mon Mothma or whatever fighting in the Senate, or this other storyline where we're seeing what's happening on Coruscant. And I think Andor's a perfect example of this. We're seeing these different facets of the adventure, and we know that they're going to cross over, but they're not going to directly link. We know that Andor's never going to, do a mission. I don't know, like fucking shooting the guy building the Death Star, or Stellan Skarsgård isn't going to go show up on the robbery mission in Aldhani and fly a plane really good. Like those things are not. They're separate adventures, is what I'm getting at.
I guess I do have a question for you then, because you mentioned like how these your worlds have these instances. They have these areas where you can run certain stories. Do you ever have, because I do have this issue, where you overly cross-contaminate instances, where like one influence is just too much for an area and it becomes like a monoculture?
Yeah. I think that's something I think about a lot. What I try and make sure I do is that when I go play in an area, I create more cultures. A lot of the times I discover that when I go to, I did a stream the other day. This is the one you were messaging me on the back of. But I was doing, I think it might be on screen even. Yeah. this bit here, this is the arid desert, and I was drawing it on stream. And to me, the arid desert and the old Iridic Empire is sort of Egyptian analog. Mm-hmm. But I also knew that I wanted there to be more cultures there than just that one culture, and I wanted to represent more analogous human cultures. And we kind of discovered on stream as we were doing this that there was this basin and there were these 3 rivers that run out of it. And now I know that there are 3 cultures based around each of the rivers. And I didn't know that when these guys would show up in other adventures. I described them as a monoculture, which is reductive, but it's useful as a dungeon master to just have a representative show up. I have an Italian Empire analog, and when one of those guys shows up, they've got their hair all done up and they've got their beard all fancy and they'd speak with an accent. But when we play adventures there, I make sure to paint the entire breadth of not just their culture, but human cultures, to make sure to show that there are 1,000 different variations of this. And that's sort of what happened as I was drawing that map of the arid, and I was realizing if I were to run an adventure here, actually what would happen is I'd make the conflict be about the different cultures in this area, how these people are different from those people, and how they historically have interacted, and how they've historically butted heads, and now maybe that rivalry has turned into a long-standing friendship, like the Brits and the French. And I try and play around with those kinds of ideas.
Okay.
But there's definitely an element of, I think, sort of a risk of monoculture. I'm certain if I had more time, I'd think of a better example.
I'll say this, like in my setting, one of the big themes that I have is that the elves represent a different time, and they exist in areas that humans do not exist in. For example, the theocracy of Allmother, which is like my wood elf analog, they exist in this place called the Autumn Wood, and there's no other human settlements there. It's next to like human nations, but it's its own like entity. One of the fears that I have though is like, there is one culture over on the east side that is a Koshu, which is kind of like East Asia analog. And having that right next to what basically amounted to my German analog raised interesting questions. But through play, I found myself making it so, because the East Asia analog had been conquered by the Germanic analog. And I started to find myself like adding in details that just made it one culture. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. And I had to like fight back against it. And now it's awesome. It's like Dragon Empire. And I find myself devolving into like an easier like funnel when I run games in these areas. But then my players bring up also something I found interesting, that I add, as you said, like dimensions or extra layers to these cultures that seem very plain and simple when they go to places. For example, place that we both stole, the City of Glass.
Yeah,
it is a dragonborn culture in a city made of glass that they like breathed in like life into. And all of the dragonborn that I've played up to that point were very like, I do steal the voice like this for the dragonborn, and all of them were basically like that. They were no nonsense, very honorable, very straightforward. And then they meet the leader of this place, and he is all about the arts and math and traveling. And they were like, this is weird. And I think adding those elements into it, where it's like I throw a wrench into the culture and be like, there's a reason things are like this, but there's also a reason that this guy is like this. And you can learn that. You can learn why there's these differences. But yeah, like I do fear sometimes kind of creating that monoculture, because I have issue. I think people mention like when you make fantasy worlds, you usually take something you have issue with and you change that for your world. One of the big things I've always had issue with is a world where if you go to one place or another, you're going to see every race, every culture represented. I like the idea of having hubs like that, but also places where you are enveloped in a culture. You are, when you go to the Goldleaf Hall in the Southern Woodlands, and my players ask, can I go to a store? I tell them there's no stores here. there are people with goods you can find, but there's no storefront. That's not how my elves operate. And I like having that kind of like that immersion that comes with these separate instances, these areas that exist independently from each other.
Yeah, I work a lot with that. I have these hubs. I've got, like I was talking about, Waterdeep, and I think Waterdeep is like classically metropolitan. You get everything there, and that's where people don't really care where you're from or what you look like. They just don't. They are a real civilization. But then if you go to into the Heartlands, where just behind there is the Andrian Heartlands in my world, and they are a bunch of agrarian, European-esque farmland. And when you're there, there's just mostly humans. And if you meet somebody of a different species, that is noteworthy. And if you meet somebody of a different human culture, that is noteworthy. And for me, I work a little bit with what I perceive to be a sort of classic kind of, whether it's classic to fantasy fiction or history, I'm not certain, but there's a certain kind of tribalism that these people have, right? And they're suspicious of outsiders, they're suspicious of the adventurers, they're suspicious of other cultures, they're suspicious of all of these things. And I make sure not to portray it as a good thing, right? That, I don't believe in that. I believe that cultures like Waterdeep are better, and and my players feel it when they're in Waterdeep. They're like, oh, great, we can do whatever we want here. We can go buy magic items. We can, but then they're in some farmland in European, in analog, and it's a whole bunch of effectively Christian white guys, and they don't like the outsiders, and they don't like this, this ale from the south, or the wine from the south. They don't like the strong spirits that come from the north for drinking, right? They have their own ideas about what makes good booze, and that's mead. And then in the food, you get a lot of culture, right? Anton from Emergent GM made a video on this, where he's talking about the culture of a place is found through the food.
Absolutely.
And they take pride in the food they make. They're like, oh, we like meat, we like venison, we like, So you separate those things out, and then you go to the south, and you get the red wine and the salads and these things, and then they poo everything else, right? And, I think a little bit of tribalism can help steer us away from this sort of modern globalization that, even though I believe in, I don't necessarily think makes my world as immersive as it could be.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about like riding that line. Like, and I'm very much like yourself. I obviously don't believe any of the things that I think make for an interesting story in a fantasy world. And I really like the idea of like hubs. Like, I have hubs in my world that really work well with that. But I think there is something to be said about riding that line of making different cultures, even in your setting that you have created, into these exotic, or like, what is it, exoticism, where you're making it seem more different, and that can be bad, but sometimes it can be really interesting if used effectively. One of the things I always tell people is racism in my setting doesn't necessarily exist to what we would consider it today, but xenophobia and a fear of other cultures and people does exist, and it will always be represented as something bad. And I think it is important to do that. I think I've known people that kind of, oh God, okay, hear me out. Have you ever read the Stormlight Archive?
I have not.
Okay. I'm about to. Okay. So I love Brandon Sanderson's work, but the fact that, and I don't want it without spoilers, I know that this probably resolves in a later book, but the fact that the heroes of the story where I am right now are also beneficiaries of a slave culture makes me feel that they're not heroes. I'm like, I'm sorry, I understand it's the world, but if you're benefiting from this institution, that makes me question your morality in the story. And I'm sure it resolves. I'm sure it changes, but like, that's where I am right now. And I think that's an interesting feeling to have. But I also, I hands down always represent a culture that practices racism or slavery as a bad culture. Even the 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐬𝐴 in my setting, the godlings, they organize into orders to go out and hunt tieflings. And I'm like full stop have said they are the bad guys. It doesn't matter if they kill a tiefling who's a cult leader, they are evil. That is what they are doing. And I enjoy kind of putting that like stamp onto stuff like that in my setting where my players know that I'm not going to represent it in any other way. Or like in Game of Thrones, one of my favorite aspects of the world is that Westeros outlawed slavery, despite all of its issues, despite all of its infighting and warring. The one thing they agree on is like the basic human right to not be owned by another human. And I'm like, okay, they got points for me on that. They got little points there.
No, like obviously, so what I'm about to say does not apply if you have players that are deeply uncomfortable with this kind of stuff. But
yes,
I think there's a lot of virtue in putting characters into your setting that are reprehensible, because players like beating the shit out of reprehensible people. So you gotta make villains. You gotta find that line of what are my players okay with and what are they not okay with, and you could do that via session zero or safety tools or whatever, however you want to do that, and just experience in some cases. But if you find that line, if you know what you can get away with, you want to get as close to the line as you can without bothering anybody or making anybody feel unduly uncomfortable. But the right amount of uncomfortable that they then want to go and absolutely kill the bad guy. Like absolutely. Like you put in a culture that's you introduce a character, you go to this European farmland thing and you introduce somebody who's bigoted. And then you give them the gift of introducing them someone who's reasonable and open-minded, and you can introduce that sort of dynamically in order for players to then be excited by, there's this good person, we're gonna go talk to them, they're gonna be our friend, and fuck that other guy.
I love, as you said, like riding that line. And for example, like all my campaigns start with a safety checklist, and any campaign that I am joining, one of my first things I tell them is I am not comfortable with torture roleplay because it's just not for me. And then like avoiding that in the game, they'll get close to it or they'll get close to something else. And I'm like, oh, I want to fight. I'm going to kill that person. Like there was one of my friend's campaigns. She had a world called Rylos, and there were these dwarves who created the Warforged and used them in a war against the giants. And this is like 50 years after that. The Warforged basically had a revolution, and they fought back. They rose up, and now they're kind of living on their own. But the dwarves still have this belief that they own them. And in that same vein, like we then like released this one guy who was a Warforged, but he actually wasn't, but he was like a high level spellcaster. And he was like, I'm going to go kill those dwarves, the ones that like ran that guild, that slaving trade. And my character was like, hell yes, pop off, do it. And like, I was like, every time I saw him, I'm like, hey, how's it going with that? And he's like, it's going pretty well. And like, just giving the comeuppance to the villains. And I love stories that allow you to do that and just really just be heroes, or I guess be heroic, is I guess like the best way to put it. And I am a
big fan of heroic roleplay, like just absolutely. But you need the villains for it. Like Indiana Jones needs to be able to punch the shit out of the Nazis, like that you just. So, how do you make it okay that this university professor is about to go kill some people with a rocket launcher, or at least threaten to kill some people with a rocket launcher? Well, you put them all in SS uniforms, and we're all fine. Like we're like, all right.
And it's so easy with like fantasy because you can literally just be like, okay, what's going to be happening here? They're skeletons. They're monsters. They're like eating people, or they're zombies, or they're in my world, I use the Blackguard very often, the like evil paladins that are now transitions. Because fun fact, Blackguards don't exist in 2024. So I've had to switch. I had a Blackguard stat block that was like CR8. And I was like, I'm going to make this like the villain of the campaign, or one of the villains of the campaign. And then I looked over at the new monster manual and it wasn't there. And I went, okay, Death Knights, CR18. Let's just go all in. Let's just let this be a whole other thing.
Nice. Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. I feel like that's pretty decent size of things to talk about. Is there anything else that like I feel like watching this, people are gonna get like they're gonna get something out of it, and I think the majority of that is just gonna be entertainment from hearing us talking about just the wildest shit possible when it comes to work. Because world building is so fun, and it's so
Yes.
idiosyncratic. It is something personable to each of us. And I'm making a video right now that's like, I do these steps and you'll have a world by the end. And like the biggest takeaway from that video is, by the way, don't forget to put you into it. Because if you forget that part, it's just going to be goop. It's going to be gray goop, tasteless. And it's, I don't know. I love world building, and I love map. I love maps so much. I start with a map every time, and then I just go from there.
Absolutely. I also love the practice of making a map, because when you sit down to make a map and you start by making, you have to make constant choices because you're drawing, right? So is this a bay or a river or a mountain? And what happens is you start having opinions. You're like, okay, well, if it's this kind of area, there would be a town here, and okay. And as you're putting the houses together, you go, well, these houses connect like that, and this, towns. You're putting towns together. You go, the towns connect here by this road, and I don't want to connect this town to that town. Why not? Well, I'm going to put hills here or forest or something to block it off, so that we get that sort of flow chart of a map to go from town to town. I love any sort of creative discipline that can get you to make choices at like a tiny little intervals.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you just sit down and try and think of a world, like that to me seems it's impossible, right? But if you think like, okay, I want to do X in the world, or I want this to be about XYZ, or more typically for me, I want to run this kind of adventure, or I want to tell this kind of story with my players. And then you start thinking of what kind of place needs to exist in order for that story to exist. You're talking about your frontier. If you just build an area, ex cathedra, not related to anything, I don't know that you're going to get anywhere. But if you decide it's a frontier, and then you go, what kind of frontier? Is it hills or forest or mountains, or a bit of all of the above? Is there a lake or an ocean that we don't know about? Mm-hmm. And you start asking yourself these fun questions. And then what does it mean if there's an ocean in here? Do the players need a ship? When are they going to get a ship? Are they going to be able to? Is there a quest to find a ship? And suddenly, the story, the adventure, the map, these things all come together to make this sort of explosive creativity where you're just making stuff.
Yeah, I whenever I world build, I do start with that map process. But at the same time, like if you look at my maps, I believe, at least looking at it, you could probably determine which areas of the world I've run campaigns in, because as I'm running campaigns, I come up with more ideas, and that's what makes it and fleshes it out. And then it's really cool when you run for a campaign like 4 years later and you tell the people, oh, you're at Summerwind Keep. Summerwind Keep was the headquarters for the original group that ran in this setting. And they're like, whoa, or like, oh, over there is Lake Fernwood.
Yeah.
And that's that's named after this druid that was in the last campaign. Just having all of that like feed into each other. It like, I think looking at maps like ours that are just huge and filled with stuff, the initial thing you think is like, I can't do that. And it's true. You can't write it out the gate. It has to.
You just got to start.
You just got to start.
Yeah.
Build a local area like what I did, and I built it out. I added stuff as I became inspired, and then I condensed it, and then I built out, and then I condensed it, and now we have what we have.
Yeah, you zoom in and out. I just want to, like, if we look at the thing behind me here, we got this map, which is all full of details and mountains and forests and trees. And then we have this map, which has none of that in it. And that's perfectly fine. Like, you're allowed to just go, okay, well, I know a bunch of stuff here, so I'm going to put that in. And I don't know anything about this, so I'm going to leave it blank. But eventually you'll go do this area, and you'll go spend a bunch of time on it, and you'll draw in all the details. You just got to give yourself permission to start playing and not worry about any of this.
It's literally like a fog of war. When you get to the area is when you will learn what's there, because I am also learning what's there as you're arriving. Like I was like, oh, I don't know, I watched this movie last week and then had this part. I'm going to put that in there, and that's
Absolutely
that's how it works. And it's so cool to see worlds that are built up like that because they have so much character in different areas. Like I think I said earlier, I struggle with giving a world like it's a personality. I think now, as we've been talking about it, I think the world has personality. It's just multiple. It's like 50 different personalities that are kind of overlapping with each other in different ways. And I think that makes for a really awesome setting. I think it really does.
Yeah, I don't know even how to begin explaining the world I have, because the only way I could possibly imagine doing it is going through it one adventure at a time, which is completely contrary to I think what most people are expecting, which is just to go, my world is about this, and I'm like, well, I don't have that. It's huge, and that's why I love it. I built it so that I could keep running it for the rest of my life, and that's going to be my goal.
I feel that. I kind of created High Haven with that same intention, and I think I have this issue where like I will sit there and I'm like, the setting, it has nothing to do with itself. It's all these separate instances. Oh, I want to change it like this, this, and this. And then I pull open my map and I look at it and I pause for a second. I go, oh, it already looks like that. I just forgot that it looked like how I wanted it. And I do think I'm going to be running this for a very long time. I think I've already been running it for like 5 years. And so this is definitely like my magnum opus. Anything I create after this is more... it's more like an instance of this world. And that's actually why a lot of it grew. I would create settings that I thought were really awesome. And then like 2 weeks later, I would look at it and I'm like, I hate all of this except these 4 parts. Instead of make a new setting, I'm just going to put it over here in High Haven. And I'm like, right there. And then it works out somehow. And I'm like, okay, cool.
Plus, as you go along, you're going to be able to do those edits as you play. I've got players that have been playing in this setting for 10 years, and to this day, I'm still getting away with tiny little retcons. And every now and again, I'll go broach the subject, and I'll go, what do you remember about, I'm trying to remember something I changed recently. I'll go, how many islands are there in the mid-sea? And they're like, I've got no idea, like 7. And I'm like, good. I'm going to go cut those 3 that I hate because there are 10. And so there used to be an island right here that I took out because I wanted a bigger ocean. And I was like, I'm just going to take it out. And now I've got a slightly bigger ocean. And there's a continent up there that used to be 3 different land masses. And I was like, I just want a bigger continent. I'm going to take these bits of ocean between the islands and just make it a part of the land. And I put it up there, and I don't think anybody really noticed. And then later on, somebody went, "Didn't that used to be different?" And I'm like,
You're like, oh, I don't know. I have a similar, like, where I built the world out. I started with like a small local area, and then I built out the west side of it, and then I built out the north side of it, and then I built out the east, and then the southeast, and I kind of like built around until I had this massive shape. And I remade the map a few years ago. And then I ran a campaign in it. And as I was looking at it, one of the big issues I had was everything feels really spaced out. It feels like there's a lot here, but it feels like I'm like having to fill this world with meaningless stuff just to make it seem more interesting. And so then I was like, I can't, my players have a joke where they're like, oh, everybody wake up. It's like monthly High Haven rewrite because I change it so often. But I had this moment where I'm like, I'm not going to let them do this time. So at the end of the last campaign, I was like, God comes to you and he has a mission, and they complete the mission. And he's like, okay, cool. I'm going to slowly change the world over the course of the next 200 years. And they were like, okay, sure. And then I just made a new map and shrunk everything together. And I was like, we're good. We're done. Like it's explained somewhere. It works.
that's hilarious.
It's just like trying to get those retcons through without making it seem too like breaky, like even like little retcons for this campaign. I asked my players, I was like, hey, I have an idea to limit magic in the world, because I'm more of a fan of the lower magic system. And I was like, I'm thinking about capping this setting to level 12 D&D, because I like those like mid-tier adventures. Because I don't think I've ever told you this. My last campaign started at level 8, and then we played to level 20, and then we were at level 20 for like a quarter of the campaign. It was exhausting. It's so much
Yeah.
fun, but like when combats with like simple, I remember a very specific day. I set my players there, and they were about to fight Baphomet and oh goodness, who was it? Probably Orcus, like 2 demon lords, and they wiped the floor with them. And I was like, this isn't fun anymore. like I don't think I want to play this campaign. And so I was like, I don't think I'm ever going up to level 20 again. And I think like making that like a setting feature where it's like, this is a world where magic is, I actually really like that. A world where magic is dying, but it's in the process of it, not post, collapse. And I like the idea of it's like slowly reducing its size.
Yeah. No, I've run a level 1 to 20 campaign, and it took 6 years. And we did, I think, 2 fights at level 20. Because I was like, I'm not, because I have run a Pathfinder adventure where we spent quite a while at level 20. And I said, I'm not doing that again. I want us to get to level 20. I want to be able to say we've done a level 1 to 20 adventure. And we did. We did like 6 months in the top tier of play from 17, 18, 19. I think it was a total of like 20 sessions or something in that spectrum. And then it was like, okay, it's the final boss battle. It's the day of the final boss battle. Let's do the pre-boss, like the mini-boss in front of the boss. Let's do that at level 20, and then let's do the boss fight itself at level 20. And in order for that fight to be remotely challenging, I think he had 2 mythic phases, so it was a 3-phase boss fight, 5 legendary actions, and then they had mythic actions afterwards. And yeah, it was a whole night. We just fought this one dude, but I had a bunch of reversals, and they had a bunch of reversals, and they had tricks up their sleeves and magic items they'd saved away. So it was an epic fight, but it was one night, and it was awesome. And I'm never doing it again, or at least not for another 6 years.
No, I feel that. Like running it for so long, I think, is what kind of soured me to it. I think like 1 or 2 sessions or 1 or 2 fights, I think would have been fine. But it's just it's exhausting at that level of play. And like as you said, like giving them those multiple phases, just like I put them against a Tarask, and they fought it, and it was like they was more difficult than some of the other ones, but they still just kind of pedaled through it. And I was like, we had this joke for a while. I was like, you guys are getting so high level, I'm just going to start throwing like 3 Tarask bandits on the road ahead of you, and they're going to rob you. Like it just gets to that like power creep, that level. Yeah. And I'm just like, I don't know if I can run something like that. But right now I think they just reached level 3, and they just got to the main city in the frontier lands. And I'm having a blast so far. I really like this campaign. I really like 2024 so far, but I still find myself like edging toward like eventually transitioning to something like Dungeon World or Dungeon Crawl Classics, something that kind of just fits with that more like Tolkien-esque aesthetic. It would probably be a different setting if I did that though, but I don't know. I high level play just it takes something from you when you do it.
Yeah. I think I ran a fight against Demogorgon when they were level 19 or 18. Because we found the mini, and we were like, well, I guess we're running Demogorgon. And it was just a regular fight. It wasn't that much different from anything else.
Yep. Yeah. And like the answers that you have for like D&D, or at least like in the previous same edition, would be like either you give them an incredible amount of hit points, big AC, or like a mix of the two, or 17,000 minions. And I kept falling into the trap of throwing minions at my players without realizing, just because I was like trying to throw things together, that these creatures, albeit CR like 3 or 5, didn't have a plus that could hit the party. I had a wizard necromancer with I think a 27 AC, and I was like, what do I do against that? I just let that be. I just let them do what they want. And the one saving grace is he kept forgetting to upgrade his skeleton army with like magic weapons and armor, and I was like, oh thank God, they're just like they're there in the background doing stuff. But like I remember running for that campaign there, we had a cleric, 20th level clerics are terrifying. And in a single fight at full power, the party could like go from 0 HP to max heals, I think 3 times. And that takes it all away. I'm like, I can't put anything in front of you guys, because even if it hits you hard, you're just going to regain that hit point with one of your abilities. Yep. And I was like, okay, I don't know. So like mid-tier play is definitely where I'm going to. And I think building a world around that level of play does benefit it as well, because when things that are higher than that show up, you can be like, well, there's a reason for this. And you add some more lore to it. And yeah. Do you, I guess question for you, what is your preferred level of play when it comes to D&D?
I really like the low levels. I really like the terrifying couple of goblins. You know, I introduced a bugbear recently, and my players were all like, "Ooh, he's got brute and surprise attack. That guy could do 4 dice of damage to us." Ooh. Nope. I really like that. But I was gonna say I think I run mostly tier 2, but but I don't know that that's true. I think I run a lot of like level 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, fair enough. Are you the type of DM that skips to level 3 or 5, or do you like to start at 1?
I very often start at 1.
Okay.
There's just something, even if I'm only going to spend a couple of sessions at level 1, if it's a longer adventure, I like the idea of having a character and being able to say we start at level 1.
Yeah.
Even if that means that we do 1 fight in the first session and then you're level 2. Like I don't know why that feels special to me, but it does. But I also just have a lot of affection for that sort of we're in a local area and we're fighting these sandbox adventures. You know, there's a cult and a tribe, and there are these sort of different bad guy factions that you can have. I don't know, basic D&D adventuring opposite them, and then getting to scale up, going from each section, like because as you go from the local area, like we're talking about the farming heartland earlier. That's where that belongs, is when you're in tier 1. It's no fun going to that place if you're 17th level, like, except as a visit, then you can wow all the peasants once. But when you're in tier 1, you're helping them fight the goblins, and then you go to the big city for tier 2, and then
onward and upward.
Yeah, you go to another plane or something.
That's why I forget where I saw it like a long time ago, but it's like levels 1 to 5 is like heroes of the town. 5 to 10 is heroes of the region or the realm. Then it's heroes of the world, and then heroes of the multiverse. And it kind of scales up. And my players did follow that track. And I think that's one of the reasons too, where like I felt like I lost the I don't know the word. Lost the track. I lost the path, because I got Planescape and I saw a red sigil and I'm like, I'm putting this in my setting. And then I did without much thought. And then I kind of looked back on it and I was like, this didn't really work too well. I'm going to close that book. I'm going to slide that over there. And like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it still created a lot of fun stuff. My favorite being what are they called? The Darrow. I think it's the little penguin dudes from Spelljammer. They are incredible.
Yeah. Hang on. They are called Doar.
The Doar.
Yeah.
And they got like little fingers. Oh, it's terrifying, but I love them. And like getting to add those into the campaign in some capacity was really fun. So things do come the things that come from, kind of building out from there is really fun. But
so you say you don't run a kit bash kitchen sink game, but it sounds to me like you do. Like I don't know what you're talking about.
I did. That's the thing. Like I did for a very long time, and I think I still do to a degree. It's more of like I do it and then I regret it, and I have this deep-seated like, why did I think this was smart? And then I just rip it out, throw it into the trash, and then start over. But a lot of awesome stuff comes from that as well. Sometimes it really works, or sometimes it just crashes and burns.
Yeah. So like I'm in the game I'm running now, they're in this frontier and they're out exploring this forest, and this is in the same sort of kit bash campaign setting. But as far as the players and the player characters are concerned, none of that stuff matters. Like I don't have Sigil, but I my own versions of those places are still out there and they're doing something. They just don't give a crap about what the characters are doing. And the characters are completely unaware of the importance of those things, and at the moment they're not a factor in the story. They're dealing with this tribe of anarchists out there, and this covalent war chief or whatever. So those things are still there. We know that they exist out there, and it's up to me to bring them into the adventure if I want to, and if I don't, then they're not going to feature. So I suppose that's sort of also the opposite of that. You were talking about globalizing your setting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's sort of the opposite of that, where they aren't a factor unless you make them a factor. Like there's a whole continent of dwarves to the north, and they're not going to be a factor until I decide that they are. And it's up to the DM to put those play pieces on the board. At least until the players get teleport, then it's up to the players to put those play pieces on the board, I suppose. But up until that point, at least, you, the DM, have the control of going, okay, I think it's time we go play with our dwarf minis.
I get that, like, and I understand, like putting it in front of them. There's something about my world building where I like fear having things that the players know exist that I don't think fit into their current goal, which I think is just like irrational. But like in the same sense, like I want to know what those dwarves are doing, even if it has nothing to do with what the players are doing, because knowing my players and knowing myself, I'm interested in that as well. And like, I fear the like I've had players ask questions like, oh, what's going on here? And I explain it to them and they're like, oh, okay. And then they fully move on. But then I'm sitting there, like they leave the room. I'm just hands and head, or head and hands. And I'm just sitting there like, what did I do? Do I need to retcon that? Do I need to add, do I need to change that? Do I need to fix that? And I obsess over this. The number of times I just sit here and stare at the map, like, what do I do?
You're fine. I don't know. I've gotten to a sort of I've gotten to a sort of a Zen-like state with this, where it's just it's up to us to define the scope of the story and the reach of it. So, for instance, I'm running a game right now, a solo game with me and my girlfriend, that is set in the same time period as that level 1 to 20 campaign I ran. But we hadn't started dating when I ran that campaign, or when I ran most of it. She came in for the latter end of it and couldn't play any, because I was like, I'm sorry, it's just too late for us to add another character at level 18 here. But now we're playing this sort of sequel to that adventure with a whole group, which is that Frontier campaign. But I wanted to make sure she got to experience that chaos that they were all going through. So I set it during the other campaign at the same time, but in a different place. I'm like, your adventure is this continent. Mm-hmm. You start in this barony, and then later on this kingdom, and then eventually these plains. And there are transitionary phases between those, but she is confined to that area. And I know roughly what the big beats out in the world are going to be. And I know that she can't change them. And she knows that she can't change them. But crucially, they're not in the adventure. If they were in the adventure, and they would feature in the adventure, and she couldn't change them, that would be railroading. Mm-hmm. But they are not in the adventure. Those things are completely unrelated to the whole other conflict she's dealing with. And she can do whatever she wants to that. Right? So she gets to play that adventure, and then we've defined the scope of what we're playing about, what we're talking about. It would be rude of me if I said, this faction shows up and you can't kill them yet. But now that I think about it, I have done that with one NPC. That's bad sportsmanship. I shouldn't have done that. But all the main enemies, all the big movers and shakers, except for that one character, I have now given to her to go engage with however she likes and define the future of those things. And that's the Feywild, that's the Shadowfell. These are things that just didn't come up in that other adventure. So she doesn't care. Like, what's happening in the desert, it's none of my business. I got to deal with the Feywild. I got to deal with I have 3 or 4 plot lines I'm concerned about.
I've tried that as well, with kind of like having like that tangential play. And as you said, like make it completely separate, different issues, different places. What I did though was, this was in like the middle of my last campaign. The players knew that the comet was in the sky and that it was going to hit the world. And I ran like a 3 or 4 session dungeon world campaign. And basically I told them throughout the course of it, I'm like, and I think it was only 2 of them, 2 of the 3 players were in the other campaign. The other person had no idea. And they basically started to realize if they prioritized one thing over another, it would like irreversibly change the course of this comet. And they were basically determining if it hit the forest or if it hit this town that they were in. And they put it together slowly, and they don't want the town to get hit. And so they kind of ended up choosing to stop this thing, which ended up making it hit the forest, which then created this entire campaign. And I like doing things like that, I think is really cool. But like, as I said, like if an NPC showed up and I was like, sorry, they're super powerful, you can't kill them. And that's why for this campaign too, I went in with no plans for a BBEG. I threw them in and I said, you're going to make the BBEG, and I can assure you that I will be there to write it down. And within 9 sessions, they have created one of, if not the BBEG of the campaign. And they have like half of the Wand of Orcus, and they were just some person that they fucked over at one point in the story. And I'm like, awesome. You guys created a villain, and I'm going to roll with that and kind of taking that approach to it. It's sandbox games. I can't speak highly of them enough. They're so much fun for a DM, as a player, everything.
I'm literally doing that right now. I told them that I don't know who the bad guy is, but I'm sure I will find out. I will put in several factions, and I think I could probably sit here and list 6 legendary like mythos characters from D&D's history or my world's history. And they could all end up being the BBEG right now, and we will not know. We will not know until most of us are 5 years older. So,
yep, that's the cool thing too. Like, because I put like those, as you said, like mythic villains in, those legendary creatures. But then this person that they created was literally just a berserker that they did something to, and I was like, this is going to be more important than I ever thought. And I'm so excited by that fact. And I came up with it in the moment, as most DMs do. And I was sitting there like, this sounds cool. Let me just throw that in. And now it's this huge plot point. And I don't know. It's the story that forms around a sandbox game is better than anything I could ever write, because it happens now. Oh my goodness. The party steals a boat full of treasure that I didn't even know existed until I thought we were playing a session. I was like, of course the treasure's on the boat. And they were like, we're going to steal it. So they steal it. And one of the characters' main goals was to become wealthy and gain influence again. And then little by little, session by session, decision by decision, they whittled down this massive fortune to 100 gold pieces. Not spending it, but promising it to other people, destroying some of it, having to offload it so they could get more people onto the boat, all this different stuff. And by the end of it, I was like, you guys don't have anything left. And I even gave them the benefit of the doubt multiple times. But then I told them, I'm like, I could not have better executed for your story the fact that you had money, you lost it, you got it again, and then you lost it again. And I'm like, this is the perfect setup for a hero's journey. And I'm like, I couldn't have done that. That just happened because everything just worked together in the perfect way.
That's fantastic. Because also when you're building worlds, you kind of get the joy of just letting your players loose on it.
Yep.
A lot of people will get precious about it, but that's the point, isn't it? That's why we have a sandbox, so you can play in it.
Yep. God.
I love that.
Well, awesome. I think my camera's running out of storage here. So thank you again for being on and talking about this. I'm sure we'll see you again on the channel. Is there anything that you would like to talk about for yourself and your channel?
Well, so is it next Monday?
The Monday after this coming Monday. Yeah.
So at the moment we just put up the Warlord class on our Patreon. If you're interested in playing a full martial character who is buffing your fellow heroes by making tactical decisions in the heat of battle using maneuvers and orders, you can come by our Patreon where you can get the Mystic Adept tier and get a full PDF with a couple of subclasses in it and everything you need in order to play that class.
Is this based at all on the 4E Warlord?
We took inspiration from several sources, and the 4E Warlord is included among them. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm a huge fighter person, so that sounds incredible.
It's a lot of fun. I think we started making this about a year and a half ago, and we're just sort of putting the finishing touches on it now to get it out on the Patreon. And we've played so much of it, not because we wanted to playtest it, although we did, but just because I put it up on my Discord for my players, and they routinely will go and make themselves a warlord for the next campaign. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, awesome. Thank you again for being on here. If you guys don't know, this is MysticArts DM, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I just know you as Daði, so I'm like, I don't know. So perfect. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you guys next time.